Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Soulganize Your Life podcast. My name is Wynn Lacey, and I'm here with Dr. Cohen, all the way up in Canada today. And we're bringing him on the show to discuss as a 5-decade-long psychotherapist. So, man, I bet he has some great answers for us. And the point of this podcast is just to discuss the difference between the ego and what I call the soul, and how we can listen a little bit more to our soul and a little bit less to our distortion in the ego. And so thank you so much, Dr. Cohen, for being here. And just jump right in. How do you even start with 5 decades of, experience to start talking about what we can fill in this half hour?
Okay, well, first of all, Wynn, I'd like to thank you for throwing your line into the water and fishing me out from here in Vancouver. When you first sent me the message, I looked at it, I thought, okay, what's this person trying to sell me? So,
I'm trying to gain wisdom. That's what I'm here
yeah.
for.
And then I looked further and I saw, well, looks like you haven't been doing this long, but I can see there's this huge counseling operation that you seem to have. And I thought, well, it looks impressive, but I've also seen some people that, they hardly know what they're doing. But then I found you a little bit, some interview or something, and I thought, okay, well, you sound like you know what you're doing. And then you actually sent me the intro material, what this would be about. I thought, well, that's pretty good questions, well put together, at least in my not so humble opinion, as my wife likes to say. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I just want to point out that you have a lot of great stuff on your, especially for therapists. You have field notes on your website, and they were
mhm.
very helpful for me just to look through. And so any therapist that might be listening, I encourage you to go to his website because it's chock full of stuff that we need to know. As especially as newer therapists, we
Mm.
don't have the wisdom, that you have. And so I'm really excited to hear from you today.
Okay. Well, let me say, in terms of this word soul, of course, it has all kinds of connotations that many people are not too fond of
Yep.
because it's to do with religion or spirituality, which particularly in your country has a lot of, woke
Yes.
label attached to it.
Yes.
So it's not totally popular, but there are still people, but they're kind of marginal. And to be honest, I've pretty much always considered myself marginal. In fact, at some point in my life, I became quite pleased to be marginal because I realized I didn't want to be part of the mainstream.
Me too.
And when I was younger, and I was quite unhappy, and I was wondering what am I doing? How come I can't figure this out? And
Mm.
I realized eventually that I was trying to join a club that I actually didn't want to be a member of.
Mm.
And so then I started to look for, well, where is this club? And I don't want to go into too much detail, but I was fortunate. I got hired into a job to work with very disturbed adolescents,
Mm.
so-called disturbed anyway, by a psychiatrist from Ireland who was not very psychiatric. He was
Mm.
looking to do something different. He felt that psychiatry had very little to offer to adolescents. And so that was a time of, I don't know if people are familiar with the human potential movement, the
Yes.
60s, 70s. So he brought in all kinds of incredible people for us to work with. And I started to read increasingly widely and take advantage of what was offered. And so I began to see a whole new way of looking at the world. So, in terms of soul, I think of soul. Perhaps my vision of it is it's you could say depends on your view. Physically, it's vital physical energy, and
Yes.
if you want to think in spiritual terms, which I think is helpful, then it's just the core energy of the universe that's within each of us.
Yes.
Somebody gave me a metaphor once. If you want, it, there's something inside us that's trying to open up,
Yes.
and if we water it and cultivate it, it does like any seed in the ground does. It starts to push up and towards the sun. And I
Hmm.
take that as very metaphoric, that the sun
Yeah.
is, you know, kind of our destination, but we don't want to get so close like was it Daedalus who, his wings melted.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we don't want to melt our wings, or at least the stuff that's holding them together. So, but the other piece is, you talk about ego, and people often talk about somebody having too much ego.
Right.
Your new president is often cited as a great example, too much ego. But I would say that everybody has, you might say, a primary ego
Yeah.
that's been formed for all kinds of reasons from all kinds of influences. And I'd say these influences are, again, if you're in certain dimension, you could say they're formed before you were born in the spiritual realm, previous lives. I'm not advocating that that exists or anything. I'm just saying, even if it's just an imagination, it's interesting and maybe helpful. But
Yes.
the other idea I have is each one of us at this moment is the end point of the entire history of existence. And
Wow.
if it begins from before anything existed, other like anything solid, maybe it still exists. So to me, that's more of an idea, a consciousness to give perspective on how important or unimportant our everyday problems are. And
I
that's
kind
much
of want you to
more,
say that again. You said we're the end point.
we are the end point of the entire history of existence, and perhaps prior, and it depends what we mean by existence, but the end point is right now, your
Wow.
end point, my end point, and the fact that we're together, it's somehow there's some kind of connection that you could some people will say, oh, it's God's will or it's predestined. Others say, the existentialists say, oh, it's just happened. It doesn't mean anything that it's happened.
Well, I think
But
what you just said is like a mic drop for me. I've sometimes said we're an unbroken chain of humanity, but I've
yeah,
never thought of when you say the end point of existence up until this point, like that makes me feel like my life has a lot more meaning right now.
how so? Tell me about that.
You know, just that if I am I almost picture myself at the front line of a battlefield, which is not
Mhm.
appropriate, but that's all I can think of. The front line, it's like it's the first thing that life is getting to interact with. And that feels very important to me. That feels like radically important now that you say it like that, rather than just I'm just one person
Mhm.
in a chain. There's a reason why I'm here right now, and I never thought about my soul that way before, wanting to be here right now in this moment with this ego that I have. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing you said. I just wanted to stop on that point. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's something I learned a few years ago. I'm not a biologist, but apparently, in order for us to exist, a particular sperm has to penetrate a particular egg.
Mm-hmm.
And so apparently there's about a half a million sperm fighting to find the egg at the same time and then
Yeah.
to penetrate it so that the baby that we have become, that we were and now are be, have grown up from happened. Now,
Yeah.
so think of this. If that's true, if that's the biological reality for me, and it's the biological reality for you, the chances of you and me actually winding up here together seem infinitesimally small.
Yes.
Or you could say it's 100% because it happened.
Yeah.
So you'd say, what? Who cares? What difference does it make to know that or not know it? But I think there's a certain consciousness that comes out of having that idea or
Yes.
similar ideas. I mean, I'm not selling this idea particularly. It happens to appeal to me,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's a certain um, beauty in having expansion of consciousness, and that's what I think this work we're doing on ourselves and our relationships is to expand consciousness. I mean, some people will be listening to this and say, "Oh yeah, blah 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 blah," and it's dead. Because what's dead? Well, you could say this is dead. Maybe I'm boring or whatever, but maybe there's something inside them is predetermined or preset, not predetermined, to be bored, cynical, whatever. And
Yeah.
so this is the influences about how do we form an ego. The truth is, I think we have multiple egos. We all have multiple personalities, but we tend to have one that is dominant, most
Mm.
dominant. And the
Okay.
question, most people talk about so and so has too much ego. Well, the problem is ego has them. They do not have it. It's
Yes.
got possession of them. And they
Yes.
learn very early in small stages from experience, maybe even pre-birth. Sometimes I think about, imagine being born. I mean, we were born, but how the hell can a tiny little thing with no ability to figure anything out
Yes.
be forced down this incredibly small channel that's chaotic, suffocating, and they got to get out, and they didn't even know there is an out, or I didn't know there was an out. I don't think you did.
No,
Yeah. And
we
then you
didn't
come
know
out of
anything
this,
else. Yeah.
pardon?
We didn't know anything else at the
No,
time.
and
You're
they
in your
come out
womb.
and boom,
Yeah.
blood and light and people and being handled, and
Yeah.
then there's somebody's going to cut something. Do I know about that? I don't know. So it's all kind of, again, it depends on your perspective. Some people say, "Oh yeah, that's science, it's medicine, it's biology," or some people say, "Wow, it's incredible." Well,
Yes.
I don't think it matters what words you put to it. It matters if your consciousness has grown. Now, why are people taking all these drugs, or not drugs, but psychoactive substances? Because they want to have that experience. And they do have it in many cases. Of course, some are damaged by it, so there's
Mm-hmm.
certain danger. And other people, they keep doing the substances because they can't get that experience any other way. Now, my view is it gives you a person a view of what's possible, and I'm not recommending it for anybody. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I'm not telling anybody not to do it. I think there's ways to get there, and we could talk a bit about that at some point if we have time, that are really helpful. So the same situation that would have been dead is like, wow, I'm sitting here, I'm on a bus with a bunch of people, it's going to take me an hour to get somewhere. Oh, so boring, or wow, it's everything is magical. But you
Yes.
can't think it's magical. It's got to actually be that way.
That's
Or maybe
right.
I'll just have a nap or tune in and space out, and that'll be good too. So I think it's about consciousness. And I'm sure you're familiar with this idea. What we see is really a lot to do with what's in here, what's in our
Mm-hmm.
mind, how we're constructed, and how we're constructed is hugely influenced from pre-birth, I would say, and certainly in the earliest days. So many, and I'm convinced that most parents have good intentions, even some of the very worst ones,
Yeah.
but their methods really are bad.
Yes.
So, a favorite thing that a lot of people, I wouldn't say favorite, but a common thing that many people have is self doubt, self criticism.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that about? Well, if you look at the intent, if you think of that part as an egoic structure, uh, an ego state, and it's dominant in some people, just say certain things and it starts working. But you can't make it not work, and not making it not work is not sufficient. Discovering its intention is really valuable and interesting and important. And if you think about inner critics, what are they after? They're trying to help you be better, but their method
Mm-hmm.
is usually not helpful. What happens
Yes.
is the child learns to be self-critical, self-doubting,
Yes.
self-hating even. And so there's huge issues that, and then they form into a certain way of being because that's the way they can survive. So they form this armor. Wilhelm Reich was one of Freud's early students who talked about character armor. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like if I'm supposed to be like this, because that's natural, but so many things happen, I wind up like this. But I don't
Mm-hmm.
actually walk around like this, but inside I'm kind of scrunched up and I
Yeah.
don't even notice it because it's just normal. This would be like Jung's idea of the unconscious, or Freud's idea. What it contained was a little different, but it's still there. And so, what we're trying to do, I think, in therapy, I mean, this is very short form, is we're trying to liberate the vital force, whether you think of it as physical, spiritual, or both, or however you think of it. And how can you do that? You have to help the structures loosen up.
Yes.
And the
Mm-hmm.
relationship between the vital force and the ego structures, and particularly the dominant one, has to be freed up. And I'll give you a small. Should I keep going?
Yeah. No, I'm learning.
Okay. So if what I like to do with people is enact this. So every ego structure within us has thoughts, has emotions, has body sensation, life
Yep.
force energy, and a number of other things, behaviors, characteristic ways of being. Their face is often like this. They don't even know all
Uh-huh.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is become conscious. So I say consciousness is very important. Unless you're very dedicated to having everything be securely the same all the time, which of course,
Hmm.
as we all know, is impossible. But you can see people trying to do that.
Yes,
I mean,
absolutely.
contemporary culture, which I see as a total reaction to the culture I grew up in, the hippie and student radical period, and now it's like very conservative. What are we after? Security, a good job, and a family that believes in the good values, whatever we happen to think those good values are. So security. I mean, I watched the debates in your country on CNN and whatever MSNBC. I thought, well, they're actually saying similar things.
Yes, yes,
Security, jobs,
yes.
and get rid of the people that, look different or act different or we think are no good. So all kinds of stuff like that. So to be more alive is actually dangerous, I would say. Like when I work with clients, I like to warn them. If you become much more closely aligned with who you truly are, and this is a lifelong process, you will be seen as strange at best
Mhm.
and as a threat at worst, and sometimes a serious threat with consequences. So you must learn how to protect yourself, but most people have learned how to protect themselves almost all the time. And so they're ready in the best way they can.
Yeah. So you're saying that as you liberate the pieces of the ego that don't serve you anymore, there's a like a medium danger point where you're crossing over towards higher consciousness, but still feel the need to protect yourself from other egos. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, what I'm saying, I'm not exactly saying this, and I'm not sure I totally believe it, but I think every ego structure we have has use, but they are all stuck at a certain point in their development, usually
Yeah.
very early. If you
Yeah.
think about, there's this work that was famous for a long time, people still do it, inner child work.
Hmm.
Well, I think inner infant work is really good. Inner fetus work is very good. Inner pre-fetus work is is also good. So you're trying to find every bit. So it's hard to think of an ego structure that properly matured, and I don't mean it gets to a static point, isn't useful, but it comes and goes. Like I can say I'm an interviewee right now, but actually, as you can probably tell, I get really wound up talking about this. I'm excited about it, and I'm
Yeah.
really appreciative of the opportunity to talk to you about it and to whoever else will see this. So I'd say every part of me is kind of aligned for the most part right now. Now, do I have I always had this kind of energy. One of the questions you asked was what was the point where you suddenly realized that things weren't right or something like that. I forget how you put it exactly.
Yeah, kind of like noticing that you actually have an ego, right? And that
Mm,
but you have something that's much more
mm,
larger, important, connecting you to every other human on the planet. When did
mm.
you realize that?
You know what? I don't think I ever realized it in one moment. I
Mm.
think I was actually, my problem growing up was I probably didn't have enough ego. I was looking for one.
Do you feel like you didn't have an identity?
I wouldn't say I didn't have any, but they were pretty weak.
Okay.
I was trying to figure out how to play. Like, just a little personal history. Like, I was born in Toronto. My parents were first generation born in Canada, Jewish,
Oh,
and
wow.
my grandparents. I thought I wish I'd had the opportunity to ask them what on earth would have ever possessed you to get on a boat and come across the ocean in the early part of the last century.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I asked my aunt, who's 93 now, and she says, well, anti-Semitism was a very big part of
Yeah.
it. But there's a certain for people to do that. Like when I was at UBC, there was a number of people doing PhDs in the center I was in, came from other countries, quite a number,
Hmm.
and it was not in their first language. And I started to look carefully at these people, and I realized they're incredibly strong. Like
Mm.
they had vitality. They were explorers, and they were tough in a good way. I mean, some of them maybe not in such a good way. So there's a vitality that some people are gifted with, and it hasn't been destroyed. You could say even your current new president, he has a tremendous amount of energy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I heard him described as an evil genius and having, what is it, um, metast- metastasizing narcissism. Just, so he's got something, but who knows what he'll do.
Yeah, you can't fault him for his vitality. He does have that, and
No.
somehow does it on McDonald's. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, I mean, he's got something physically that I can only envy, and he doesn't do anything to look after it as far as I can make out.
That's
I don't
right.
wanna I don't wanna make out this about Donnie, as I used to call him. Don't cut that part out.
Well, yeah. So going back, so you said as a child, your ego, the parts of your ego actually felt
Yeah.
less bloated or less in the forefront of your beingness.
It didn't exist.
Yeah.
Barely existed because I was always trying to figure out how do I fit in with the other kids. So you
Mm,
could say that was my ego, was
yeah.
the misfit. Only I didn't
Mm,
identify it, of course, as a child.
yeah.
Actually, your question is good. It suddenly occurs to me that was an ego I had. And it was
Yes.
probably, I'm a misfit. I don't fit in. People probably don't like me. I'm the ugliest kid. All these things. I remember not so long ago, looking back at some pictures of myself as a kid and as a young adult. I thought, geez, I was actually a good looking kid. But I didn't see it that way when I looked in the
Right.
mirror.
Yeah. The
So there
ego
was a
blocks
lot of,
us from, yeah, the ego blocks us from the truth a lot of the time.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not like I run around now saying, "Look how beautiful I am," although I'd like my wife to say it to me more often, but she
Aw. But then when did were you raised to know that you had a larger relationship to the universe? Like I said, I call the soul. Did you call it anything? Did you have that realization, or was it later on in life, or
That's a good question. I wasn't. We were a Jewish family in a non-Jewish neighborhood in a fairly good area of Vancouver. We weren't rich, but we weren't. Well, my mother told me we were going to the poorhouse pretty soon because my dad wasn't good with money. So
Hmm.
I didn't think that sounded like a very good thing to happen. But I knew that my friends in the neighborhood had something. They'd go to church. Christmas, this always stood out in my memory. Christmas time would come, and I'd walk down the street, and everybody's house had lights in it, except ours,
Hmm.
and actually our next door neighbors who were synchronistically Jewish as well. And
Hmm.
my mother, to her credit, didn't want us to feel bad, so she kind of gave us some kind of mini Christmas till I was about 12. So
Okay.
that was very good, I thought. But in
Yeah.
the end, and I had a bar mitzvah, and as soon as I finished, I told my dad, "That's it. I'm not going anymore. It's too boring." And so that was my religious, spiritual background. I found it very uninteresting. But
Did
somehow,
you
well,
come to find an inner experience at some point in your life where you're like, oh, there's more to me than just the stories that I tell myself?
there was something in my consciousness that always said to me, "You're special,"
No,
and it
I
didn't
love that.
mean I didn't think I never thought it meant like I'm better than anybody. Just
Right.
something about me was special.
Aw.
And so and I think I just had that view even when terrible things happened. Well, when I had things happen that I wasn't happy about, I wasn't so in touch with that, but it would always come back.
Wow. And
Mm.
then did you at some point decide you wanted to expand on it and grow it because of Jung and everything we learn and from those great psychologists?
Well, you know the joke about therapists, right? They get into it to solve their own
Yeah.
problems. Believe me, that's why I got into it. I wanted to
Yeah,
solve my own problems because
absolutely.
I thought subsequently I thought everybody should get into it to solve their own problems because I don't know anybody that isn't growing up with wounds and damage that have
Right.
affected how they have become not themselves.
And to your point, when we admit that and sit with someone who's non-judgmental, there's so
Mhm.
much growth that can happen. And I just want people to know they can keep growing till the day they die. They don't, therapy is not to come and just tell me what you don't want. You know, it can be a place like where from your field notes, to me sounds like what you do in your therapy with people is that you help them go beyond what they don't want and more into that expanded state of consciousness, whatever you call it. And, you know, can you share just for a few minutes, like what that looks like for you? Do you follow a particular theory? Do you, you know, do you have specific methods you use for yourself or for others?
Well, Jung had a line that I really liked. When the doctor sits down with the patient, he must drop all his theories and learn the theory of that patient.
Yes.
And
Amen.
yeah, but of course, it's a good idea, but to become somebody that can actually do that, there's no end to it. I mean,
That's
I think
right.
I'm quite good at that, but I don't think I finished the course. I used to always think, okay, I've already got it now. And 5 years later, I said, okay, now I've got it. And then eventually, I thought every 5 years, I seem to think I have it, and it changes. So I finally was convinced there's no end to it. And
Yeah,
fortunately for me, it's a great adventure
it is.
until, yeah.
Well, what would you call it? I mean, I call it the soul. What would you call what your journey is?
I usually try and speak the language of the person I'm talking to.
Mm,
So I'm talking to you, so we can call it soul. But I would say, in Buddhism, they talk about emptiness, no self. In,
yes.
in the Tao, it's like the vital, I don't, actually, there's no way. You remember the first chapter is whatever you can say about it is not what it is. That's kind
Mm,
of a guiding principle for me, but at the same time we have this ability to create words, and so creating words in a way that expands the vision rather than contracts it. I remember when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I always wanted to know, what is it this or is it that, just tell
yeah.
me. And people, of course,
Yes.
some people would try and tell me, and some didn't know what I was talking about. But I realized usually it's both this and that and more. And so
Mm.
again, it's the consciousness that can contain all that. But in
So
order to
I guess
get,
I guess what I hear you saying is that there's not an ego and a soul, but rather there's just a constant expansion or contraction.
yeah, I suppose it's a bit prosaic, but to say the ego is an ego state is something that I need in a particular moment. If I'm very awake, I can put it down. In fact, I
Mm,
don't have to put it down. It'll just go down and something else will come in. But it's
yeah,
a descriptive. Like if I meet my friend after this and we go for a meal, well, no, I'm a friend and a meal eater and a restaurant goer. So
yeah.
those are not really powerful ego states, but they are the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One
What?
of the guests I had said that he now identifies the intrinsic ego, which is the place, so he knows where to put the spoon to feed the body. He said that's pretty much all he wants to know at this point is where do I put so when you go out to eat, where do I put the spoon? And, you know, to your point, like that's one of the egos, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then there's all these other ones, like you said, the feeling of not belonging, the feeling of being overly strong, right? And poor thing, or like there's, so for you, it's not a separate noun, right? Like it's this one thing. And, you know,
Mm-hmm.
more to how Freud talked about defense mechanisms. And we have a lot of different ways of coping in a lot of different situations, but that's really exhausting, you know? And I think that the more that I get in touch with my higher self, the less exhausted I am because I feel at peace. Like I'm just myself. To your point, the more I'm to myself, though, I can offend a lot more people. Um, and I need to be okay with that. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, you will. But tell me,
and I
what?
have.
Of course, that means you and I are probably in the same club. When you say your higher self, I hear people talk about this, and I have an idea what they usually mean. But tell me what is the higher self? What's your higher self?
Well,
How do you?
Whenever I meditate now, because I've been practicing for so long, it feels like I'm in a place of not hearing my story anymore. And when your story isn't there, there's just something beautiful. It it it's I can't explain it, and it's probably a good thing. Like you said, if you can't explain it, then it's not the ego, but
Mhm.
it feels higher, and I guess that's not really true. Expanded is probably the better word.
Mhm.
Where my story is so small, it's like a pin in a haystack. Um, and then I come back down though, but I do want to love on my own family and see my own clients and be with the people that God or whatever put me with. And then my ego gets a lot more involved. So I guess, to your point, it's not really two separate things. It's really more of different states.
Mhm. Mhm.
But what do you want to add to that before we close?
Sorry, say that again.
What do you want to add to what I said before we close?
What do I want to add? Hmm. Well, what I'll add is that I'm aware of a certain kind of rapport between us, and we're both good at establishing that with people. So when you get two people that are good at it, you can sometimes wonder how authentic is it. Maybe we're just good at it, but is it actually
Mm.
the thing we're talking about? And this has been quite short, and I'm not brilliant enough to say if this is totally authentic or not. I think it's gone well, and I feel the connection between us has been very good, very
Yeah,
strong.
yeah.
And these are kind of positive judgments, which everybody likes, as opposed to negative ones like, "Oh, that sucked," or "God, that was terrible."
Uh-huh.
So I would just say it's my personal experiences. I don't know. I have a good feeling talking to you, being with you in this pixelated way, and I think, oh, I wonder if we'll ever meet again. But this has been good, and yeah.
Well, I hope so. I feel like someone like you could bring a lot more, moments to this podcast to help people, especially therapists who might end up coming to the show to listen, because I really feel like there's, a wisdom that you must have grown up with in our field that I feel like could be somewhat lost. Probably the in-depth arguments and conversations I can only imagine you had back in the day about Jung or Freud. And we just flip through it, in a second and get right to, the 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 modern day version of therapy, the 12 sessions or less. And so I hope that I hope you come back.
Well, I think I'll be interested to do that. I would just say I was very fortunate at the time I was starting to learn about all this in terms
Yeah.
of the concepts and methods. I was exposed and had access to incredible people. I actually saw Fritz Perls in reality
Oh my God,
several times.
really?
And I was associated with the Jungian group in Vancouver for quite some time. Some of the names that I got to meet, they've all written books. They're all famous. Most of them are not even alive anymore. But
Wow.
just incredible opportunities. And I'll say one thing for the therapists that are listening. That when I was teaching, students would ask me, "What do I have to do to become a good therapist?"
Yeah.
And I said, "You have to do your own therapy, and you have
Yes.
to have the right a good therapist. And on top of that, once you're practicing, you find somebody that can supervise your work that you really feel can help you." So
Hmm.
supervision is the wrong word. It's really, I think it's a conversation, a consultation, and it's expansive. It's got potential to be expansive, but at times it needs to contract as well. But your relation, and what I tell clients is, we're working on Zoom. That's all I do now, on Zoom or by phone.
Okay.
Um, when my office had to shut down for COVID, I thought, oh, this will be terrible. What a surprise. It's not only not terrible, it's great. I
Yeah.
just got out of the shower 10 minutes before I came to talk to you.
So if people wanted, I will say, your field notes are really interesting. If somebody wanted to go look at them, how do they find you?
Well, they can go to, let's see here, got them open right. I've got my website open. So the website is my name, basically Dr. Avraham Cohen. So DRAVRAHAMCOHEN.com. And then basically they'll see there's a bunch of heading or, headings, and they'll see one that says field notes. So there's quite a few years of them now.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
talk about all kinds of stuff. I just added in the audio portion maybe about 2 years ago, I think.
Okay, so they can listen
Or
in the car on the way to work, huh?
yeah, as far as I can make out, nobody reads them anymore.
Yeah, yeah. We're
Yeah,
all listening in the car and so forth.
yeah. And if they want to contact me directly, it's dr lowercase dot avraham.cohen @gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, that's how I found you.
Yeah,
And you're on LinkedIn, so people can find you on LinkedIn also,
yeah.
right?
So you
Yeah.
were just sort of swimming around and you ran into my pool.
Yep.
Good work.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Well, thanks. It's been lovely to meet you and lovely to talk to you. And yeah, I'll look forward to our future possibilities.
Yeah.